There are several reasons why the Roman Empire is considered one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Stone roads connecting 3 continents, legal systems that became the foundation of modern justice, architecture that still stands magnificently today. Yet beneath all that grandeur lay a darkness so profound that even by the brutal standards of ancient times, certain events still shake the human conscience. In the year 65 AD, in a luxurious villa on the slopes of Palatine Hill, a young man named Sporus was living his final days as a free human being. He was a freedman, a former slave who had been liberated, around 15 years old, with a face that, according to historical records, bore a striking resemblance to Poppaea Sabina, Emperor Nero's wife, who had recently died under tragic circumstances. Sporus had no idea that this physical similarity would transform his life into one of the most horrifying tragedies in human history. In the coming months, by direct order of the most powerful emperor on earth, he would lose not only his freedom, not only his body, but his very identity as a human being. What would happen to Sporus wasn't just a story of individual cruelty by a tyrant. This is a dark mirror of how absolute power can destroy every concept of humanity. This is the story of how someone can be reduced to nothing more than an object, a living doll to satisfy the obsession of a ruler who had lost all moral boundaries. If you feel uncomfortable with discussions of psychological violence, identity erasure, and extreme abuse of power, you might want to skip this video. I promise this story isn't just sensational darkness from the past. It's an important lesson about how unchecked power can turn humans into monsters, and how victims fight to preserve the remnants of their dignity. To understand how Sporus's tragedy could happen, we need to step back a few decades and see how the Roman power system worked. You might notice the dark irony of a civilization that gave us concepts of law and justice, yet simultaneously allowed unimaginable cruelty. In the mid-1st century AD, the Roman Empire was at the peak of its power. Its territory stretched from Scotland to Sudan, from Portugal to Iraq. More than 60 million people lived under Roman rule, subject to one figure sitting in a marble palace on Palatine Hill. The real danger of this system wasn't its size, but its structure. The Roman emperor wasn't just a head of state, he was Pontifex Maximus, the high priest believed to have direct connection with the gods. He was Pater Patriae, father of the nation with absolute authority over every aspect of his subjects' lives. In practice, no institution could truly limit him. The Senate still existed, of course, though they had long lost real power. Senators who once led the Republic were now little more than advisors, whose job was to nod in agreement with the emperor's will. Anyone who dared challenge could easily be accused of treason and meet an unnatural death, or as we'll see, a fate far worse than death. Within this system lived freedmen like Sporus, former slaves who had been liberated yet remained bound to their patrons. The freedman status was a paradoxical, and as we'll see, very dangerous position. Technically they were free, could own property, even become wealthy. They remained dependent on their patrons' goodwill, however, and in practice were still very vulnerable to elite desires. They existed in social limbo, no longer slaves, yet never able to become full citizens. This is where Sporus was when he first caught Nero's attention. Nero ascended the throne at age 16 in 54 AD, after his mother Agrippina reportedly successfully poisoned the previous emperor, Claudius. While claims about poison are still debated by historians today, what's undeniable is that Agrippina was an extremely ambitious woman who wouldn't let anything prevent her son from taking the throne. Initially, Nero's reign began with great hope. He was surrounded by wise advisors like the philosopher Seneca and Praetorian prefect Burrus. The first 5 years of his rule were even known as Quinquennium Neronis, Nero's golden period that brought stability and prosperity. You know the saying about power tending to corrupt, and absolute power corrupting absolutely. Nero, who from childhood was used to getting whatever he wanted, began showing his true nature when he felt no one could stop him. The first murder, this is well-documented historical fact, was his own mother. In 59 AD, when Agrippina began interfering too much in state affairs, Nero decided she had to die. Historian Tacitus recorded various assassination attempts he made. Ships designed to sink, roofs designed to collapse. When all these creative methods failed, he sent soldiers to kill her directly. The truly disturbing aspect wasn't just that he killed his own mother, yet how he did it with such systematic planning. This wasn't murder in a moment of rage, this was a calculated execution by a son against the woman who gave birth to him. After Agrippina's murder, it was as if the last dam had burst. Nero began killing anyone he considered threatening or annoying. His first wife, Octavia, was exiled, then murdered on charges of adultery that were most likely false. His stepbrother, Britannicus, was poisoned at a dinner party. Nero reportedly watched his death with horrifying satisfaction. Even his teacher and advisor, Seneca, was forced to commit suicide when Nero became suspicious of his loyalty. Ironically, Seneca, who taught Stoic philosophy about virtue and self-control, ultimately became a victim of his own student who had lost all moral control. Of all Nero's relationships, none changed him more deeply than his obsession with Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea Sabina was everything a Roman man wanted in a woman. Historian Pliny the Elder recorded that she possessed extraordinary beauty. Golden hair that was reportedly so beautiful that legend says she kept hundreds of female donkeys for the milk she used in baths to keep her skin smooth. While details about the donkeys might be more legendary than factual, her beauty was undoubtedly famous throughout the empire. More crucial than her beauty was her intelligence. Poppaea was educated, skilled at negotiation, most dangerously, very ambitious. When she met Nero around 50 AD, she was already married to Marcus Salvius Otho, one of the emperor's close friends. Poppaea saw a greater opportunity and wouldn't waste it. Within months, she had manipulated Nero until the emperor was madly in love with her. Nero exiled Otho to Lusitania, essentially banishing him to the edge of the world, taking Poppaea as his mistress. In 62, after disposing of Octavia, he married Poppaea in a lavish ceremony that drained the state treasury. For Nero, Poppaea wasn't just a wife, she was a total obsession. He built new sections of the palace for her with walls covered in gold and gems. He wrote poetry for her, sang for her, even performed on public stages, something extremely shameful for a Roman emperor who should maintain imperial dignity. Historian Suetonius recorded that Nero often spent hours just staring at Poppaea, as if afraid she would disappear if he didn't constantly watch her. This obsession was so intense, it began disrupting state affairs. Nero preferred spending time with Poppaea to attending Senate meetings or handling imperial administration. Then in 65 AD, everything changed in one horrifying night. Poppaea was pregnant with their second child when tragedy struck. The official version from the palace said she died from pregnancy complications, a safe and uncontroversial explanation. Historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, writing after Nero's death when they didn't need to fear political repression, hinted at something much darker. Historical accounts suggest that one night Nero came home angry from chariot racing, another hobby that obsessed him. Poppaea, heavily pregnant, reportedly criticized Nero's habit of spending nights partying and neglecting his responsibilities as husband and emperor. What happened next remains one of history's most debated questions. While some sources suggest pregnancy complications, other historical accounts hint at violence. Tacitus suggested that in his rage, Nero attacked Poppaea while she was pregnant. Suetonius was more explicit, stating that the emperor kicked his pregnant wife's belly. Whether these accounts are accurate, or whether they were rumors spread by Nero's enemies after his death, remains uncertain. The undeniable fact is that Poppaea died the next day, along with the baby she was carrying. When Nero realized Poppaea was dead, whether by his hand or not, he suffered what can only be described as a total nervous breakdown. For days he refused to leave Poppaea's room, according to some sources. He even refused to allow her body to be buried. Palace advisors eventually had to use various means to make him accept the reality that Poppaea was dead. What happened next was most horrifying. Instead of grieving normally and moving on with his life, Nero began seeking ways to bring Poppaea back to life. He ordered the empire's best sculptors to create statues that perfectly resembled his wife. He even ordered that Poppaea's body not be cremated, as was Roman tradition, yet preserved with spices and perfumes like Egyptian tradition. None of this was enough. Nero wanted something more real, more alive. According to some records, he forced palace prostitutes to dress like Poppaea and pretend to be her. There were also reports that he searched throughout the empire for women who resembled Poppaea to bring to the palace. Nothing could satisfy his need for a living Poppaea. Then, in his deepening desperation, someone at the palace told him about a young freedman who not only resembled Poppaea Sabina, yet was even more perfect, because he could be shaped, changed, and completely controlled. The young man's name was Sporus. He had no idea that his resemblance to the emperor's dead wife would turn his life into a nightmare lasting years. Few people realized that what would happen to Sporus wasn't just about a mad emperor's obsession. yet about how absolute power systems allow the transformation of someone from human to object, from individual to living doll, to satisfy sick fantasies. How exactly Sporus first caught Nero's attention remains a historical mystery. What we know from records by Cassius Dio and other sources is that in late 65 or early 66 AD, a young freedman was brought before the emperor because of his striking resemblance to poppaea sabina. Most likely, one of the palace courtiers, perhaps someone wanting to curry favor with the grieving emperor, discovered Sporus and reported him. In the highly hierarchical Roman culture, finding ways to please your patron was a matter of life and death, especially when that patron was an increasingly unstable emperor. Consider Sporus's situation then. He was a teenage freedman whose life was relatively quiet and unremarkable. Perhaps he worked at one of the villas around Rome, or even in the palace as one of thousands of servants handling the empire's daily needs. Suddenly, without warning, he was summoned to face the most powerful emperor in the world. His terror must have been overwhelming. In the Roman system, being summoned before the emperor could mean many things: promotion, rewards, or death. No one ever knew Nero's mood on any given day, and since Poppaea's death, his unpredictability was becoming worrying even to those closest to him. When Sporus was finally brought before Nero, the emperor's reaction was reportedly so intense it shocked even courtiers accustomed to his strangeness. Existing records indicate that Nero stared at Sporus in long silence, as if seeing a ghost. Perhaps, in his mind already disturbed by grief and guilt, that's exactly what he saw: Poppaea's ghost returning to him in the form of this young man. What happened next was one of the most horrifying decisions in the history of human power. Instead of rewarding Sporus for his resemblance to his beloved wife, or even letting him leave quietly, Nero made a decision that would change the young man's life forever. He would transform Sporus into poppaea. This represented far more than costume or makeup. Nero wanted total, permanent, irreversible transformation. To achieve that, he ordered something that even by ancient Roman standards was considered extreme. Sporus had to be castrated. Castration wasn't completely foreign in the ancient world. There was tradition of using eunuchs in Eastern palaces, even in Rome itself. Some slaves were castrated for specific purposes. Sporus' situation was unique because the context and motivation differed entirely. The motivation wasn't practical or economic purposes. This was mutilation, forced to fulfill the psychological fantasy of a ruler who had lost touch with reality. Most tragically, Sporus had absolutely no choice in the matter. Castration procedures at that time were performed without modern anesthesia and with high risk of death. The mortality rate for this operation could reach 60 to 70%, especially when performed on teenagers like Sporus. Survivors often experienced long-term complications, from infections to hormonal problems affecting their entire bodies. More important than physical trauma was psychological trauma, the loss of sexual and gender identity fundamental to someone's sense of self. For Sporus, this operation didn't just eliminate his reproductive capacity, yet also marked the end of his identity as a young Roman man and the beginning of his transformation into something else. After Sporus recovered from the operation, the fact that he survived was already a miracle. The second phase of his transformation began. Nero didn't just want to change his body, yet his entire identity. The name Sporus was erased. From now on, he would be called Sabina, a name directly referencing but poppaea sabina. This represented more than an ordinary name change. In Roman culture, names were a fundamental part of identity. Names showed origin, social status, even someone's destiny. By erasing his original name and giving him Poppaea's name, Nero was symbolically erasing Sporus' existence as an individual and creating someone new, or rather, recreating someone who was already dead. The name change was just the beginning. Sporus, who now had to be called Sabina, was forced to wear women's clothing, the empress's jewelry, and even the same hairstyle as Poppaea. Every detail of his physical appearance was controlled to create the perfect illusion. Contemporary sources describe the meticulous nature of this transformation. Nero employed the same hairdressers, makeup artists, and seamstresses who had once served Poppaea. These palace workers later testified that they were forced to study preserved portraits and statues of the dead empress to ensure perfect replication in their work on Sporus. Then came what might be the most grotesque part of this entire story. Nero decided to marry his creation. In 67 AD, Nero held a wedding ceremony with Sporus, now renamed Sabina. This represented no symbolic or private marriage. This was a public ceremony attended by high imperial officials and even some Senate members. Picture how shocking and disturbing this spectacle was for witnesses. Even in ancient Rome, where sexual practices were quite liberal compared to later standards, same-sex marriage, especially with someone forced to change gender, was something never seen before. Historian Cassius Dio wrote with tones of shock and disgust about this ceremony, noting that Nero wore a bridal gown and veil like a traditional female bride, while Sporus played the role of husband. This detail might be wrong or distorted. Other sources suggest that Sporus was forced to play the wife role in this relationship. The undeniable fact is that this ceremony was witnessed with a mixture of fear, disgust, and amazement by Rome's elite. No one dared oppose it openly. Those who still remembered the fate of Agrippina, Seneca, and Nero's other victims wouldn't take that risk. Their silent reactions were recorded in various historical sources. Historian Suetonius noted that after the ceremony, one witness was quoted saying cynically, "How fortunate the world would have been if Nero's father had such a wife," an indirect mockery of the emperor's madness. After that marriage, Sporus's life became a never-ending performance. He had to appear as the emperor's wife at various state events, formal dinners, and even official trips. The mental anguish he endured daily defies comprehension. Not only had he lost his physical and sexual identity, yet he also had to constantly play the character of someone else. Someone who was dead, someone he might never have known personally. Every movement, every word, every facial expression was controlled and monitored. He had to learn to walk like Poppaea, speak like Poppaea, even laugh like Poppaea. He became an actor forced to play the same role every day for years, without breaks, without rest, without opportunity to be himself. Historical records indicate that Nero would become angry if Sporus showed personality or mannerisms that didn't match his memories of Poppaea. He even hired Poppaea's former servants to train Sporus to imitate his wife more perfectly. According to Cassius Dio's accounts, Sporus was forced to wear Poppaea's actual jewelry and clothing. Palace servants reported that Nero would spend hours correcting Sporus's posture, voice, and gestures until they perfectly matched his deceased wife. When foreign dignitaries visited, they were required to address Sporus as Augusta and treat him as a legitimate empress. The psychological toll was devastating. Ancient sources describe Sporus as becoming increasingly withdrawn and silent, except when performing his required role. Palace staff whispered that he would sometimes be found staring at reflections, as if trying to find traces of his original self beneath the elaborate makeup and feminine attire. Most horrifyingly, he had to endure all this while watching Nero's mental state deteriorate further. The emperor, whose obsession with Poppaea was already irrational, became increasingly possessive and paranoid toward his new Sabina, treating him simultaneously as a beloved wife and a carefully guarded prisoner. In 67-68 AD, Nero decided to take a grand trip to Greece, the land he considered the center of culture and art. This represented no ordinary diplomatic visit. Nero wanted to participate in various Greek art and athletic competitions, from chariot racing to music contests. Naturally, he brought his new wife, Sporus, on this journey. The trip to Greece became a kind of victory lap for Nero to show off his creation. In various cities they visited, Sporus had to appear as Rome's empress, receiving honors and gifts that should have been given to a legitimate emperor's wife. For the Greek people witnessing this, the sight must have been very strange and disturbing. They saw an emperor treating a castrated young man as his wife, forcing him to wear women's clothing and behave like someone who was dead. Historical records from this period provide fascinating glimpses into how different Greek cities reacted to this unprecedented spectacle. In Corinth, local magistrates reportedly struggled with protocol. How does one properly receive an empress who is clearly male? Greek historians noted the uncomfortable silence that fell over official ceremonies when Sporus was introduced. At the Olympic Games, where Nero insisted on competing, despite being clearly outmatched, Sporus was seated in the position traditionally reserved for the emperor's wife. Spectators whispered about the young man forced to wear imperial purple and gold, his painted face a grotesque parody of feminine beauty. Some Greek witnesses described feeling pity for what one contemporary account called the emperor's living toy. In Athens, philosophers and intellectuals were particularly disturbed by what they witnessed. To the Greeks, who valued natural order and rational thought, Nero's creation represented the ultimate perversion of both nature and reason. Letters from Athenian citizens to relatives described their shock at seeing Roman power used for such unnatural purposes. Contemporary accounts suggest that in certain cities, public reaction to sporus ranged from amazement to silent sympathy. There were reports that some Greeks tried to give small assistance to sporus, perhaps extra food or words of comfort, when Nero wasn't watching. Sporus couldn't accept any help without deadly risk, both for himself and for those trying to help him. He was truly isolated in his role as a living replica of someone dead, now paraded before the entire Greek world as proof of Roman imperial madness. While Nero was busy playing in Greece with sporus, the political situation in Rome began deteriorating. Corruption, excessive spending on Nero's personal projects, and dissatisfaction with his leadership began reaching a boiling point. In 68 AD, rebellions started. The governor of Hispania, Servius Sulpicius Galba, declared himself emperor and began marching toward Rome with support from several legions. When news of the rebellion reached Greece, Nero panicked. For the first time in his life, he faced a real threat to his power. He rushed back to Rome with his entourage, including sporus. It was too late. Support for Nero had evaporated. Even the Praetorian Guard, the elite troops supposed to protect the emperor, turned to support Galba. On June 9, 68 AD, the Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state and imposed a death sentence in absentia. Realizing he had nowhere to run, Nero decided to commit suicide. On June 11th, at a villa outside Rome, he stabbed himself in the throat while uttering his famous last words, "Qualis artifex perio, what an artist perishes with me." With Nero's death, one might assume Sporus's suffering finally ended. Unfortunately, fate had different plans for him. When Galba arrived in Rome and became the new emperor, he inherited not only Nero's power, yet also the dead emperor's personal property. In Roman legal concepts, Sporus was property, not a free human with his own rights. Galba, already in his 70s and known for his stinginess and practical nature, initially didn't know what to do with this strange gift. Sporus wasn't an ordinary slave who could be sold or put to work. He was a living symbol of Nero's moral downfall, an embarrassing reminder of the previous emperor's madness. Before Galba could decide Sporus's fate, his own power began to waver. His harsh rule and extreme austerity policies made him unpopular with both soldiers and people. Just 7 months after taking the throne, Galba was killed in a coup led by Marcus Salvius Otho. Yes, the same Otho who was previously Poppaea Sabina's husband before Nero took her. With horrifying irony, Sporus again changed hands, this time to the man who was once married to the woman he was forced to imitate. For Otho, seeing Sporus must have awakened very complex feelings. On one hand, this young man was a living reminder of the wife he once loved, Poppaea, who was taken from him by Nero. On the other hand, Sporus was also a symbol of the humiliation he received, proof of how a mad emperor could manipulate and destroy the lives of weaker people. Historical sources suggest that Otho treated Sporus with a mixture of nostalgia and pity. He didn't force Sporus to continue his role as emperor's wife, yet also didn't fully free him from his status as imperial property. In some ways, Otho's treatment might have been more humane than Nero's. For Sporus, this also meant he had to face something that might be equally painful: constant reminders of the life he lost and the identity that had been destroyed. Think about his daily reality. Constantly seeing the man who was once married to the woman he was forced to imitate. Every conversation, every eye contact must have brought back memories of who he was before and what had been lost. Otho's reign didn't last long. Just 3 months after taking the throne, he faced a challenge from another general, Aulus Vitellius, who was marching from Germania with legions loyal to him. In the Battle of Bedriacum in April 69 AD, Otho's forces were decisively defeated. Facing inevitable defeat and unwilling to drag Rome into prolonged civil war, Otho chose suicide. Once again, Sporus changed hands to a new ruler. Aulus Vitellius, the third emperor in that chaotic year, was a very different figure from his predecessors. If Galba was too harsh and Otho too sentimental, Vitellius was the type of ruler who was sadistic and sought entertainment in others' suffering. When Vitellius took power and inherited Sporus, he saw an opportunity for unprecedented spectacle. Instead of treating Sporus as a wife like Nero, or with mixed nostalgia like Otho, Vitellius had a far more horrifying plan. He would use Sporus in a public performance designed to entertain the Roman masses, while simultaneously humiliating the victim of Nero's cruelty. His plan was to stage a theatrical performance in the arena, where Sporus would be forced to play Persephone, the goddess in Greek mythology who was kidnapped and raped by Hades, ruler of the underworld. The symbolism of this role choice couldn't be clearer or more cruel. Persephone was a symbol of lost purity, of someone forced into a world of darkness against their will. In the myth, she was kidnapped while picking flowers in a meadow, then forced to become queen of the underworld through forced marriage to Hades. The parallel with Sporus' fate was painfully clear. A young man who was castrated and forced to become an emperor's wife, whose life had been reduced to performance for others' satisfaction. Vitellius's scheme became even more disturbing when we learned that in his version of the performance, Persephone's rape wouldn't be simulated. Sporus would actually be handed over to actors who would assault him in front of thousands of spectators as the climax of this drama. When Sporus heard of this horrifying plan, he faced an unbearable choice. He could endure this final humiliation and die in the most shameful way imaginable, or he could take the only action still within his control. For the first time since he was forced into Nero's obsessive whirlpool years ago, Sporus made his own decision about his life. He chose suicide. Historian Cassius Dio recorded that Sporus killed himself to avoid the humiliation of an unworthy performance. Details of how he did it aren't recorded. Perhaps poison, perhaps a knife, perhaps another method available to someone in his position. What mattered wasn't the method, yet his decision. For the first time in years, Sporus had control over his own fate. He couldn't choose how to live, yet he could choose how to die. In that choice, he reclaimed something that had been taken from him years ago, his dignity as a human being. Ironically, Sporus died just months before Vitellius himself was killed in a coup that brought Vespasian to power at the end of 69 AD. The year of 4 emperors finally ended, with it the most chaotic period in the early Roman Empire's history. For Sporus, the political stability that came too late meant nothing. He had become a victim of a system that allowed absolute power to destroy human lives based on the most twisted personal desires. His death was barely recorded in official history. No monument for him, no poetry to commemorate his suffering, not even a clear record of where he was buried. For the Roman power system, he was never more than property that passed from one ruler to another. In his decision to die, rather than endure final humiliation, Sporus left a message that echoes across centuries. Even in the most desperate situations, even when all choices have been taken away, there's always one last choice that no one can take, the choice to maintain dignity in death. Sporus' story isn't an anomaly in human history. He represents millions of people throughout history who became victims of power systems without moral boundaries. He's a symbol of what happens when humans are reduced to objects for others' satisfaction. What happened to him? Identity erasure, total control over body and soul, transformation from subject to object, is a pattern that repeats throughout human civilizations. From the palace eunuchs of Byzantine emperors to the court slaves of various kingdoms, the elements that made Sporus' tragedy so horrifying appear across cultures and centuries. His story becomes particularly relevant when we see how absolute power enables total dehumanization. Nero wasn't just a mad emperor. He was a product of a system that gave him unlimited power over his subjects' lives and deaths. The Roman imperial system, for all its achievements, contained within it the seeds of such tragedies. Throughout Roman history itself, we see similar patterns. Caligula declaring himself a god and demanding worship, Commodus forcing senators to fight as gladiators, Domitian executing citizens on mere suspicion. The concentration of power without accountability created conditions where human dignity could be destroyed on imperial whim. The historical record shows us that Sporus' fate was extreme even by Roman standards. Yet the underlying dynamic, the powerful using their power to reduce the weak to instruments for their own satisfaction, was deeply embedded in imperial culture. When historians like Cassius Dio and Suetonius recorded these events, they understood they were documenting not just individual cruelties, but systematic failures of governance. What makes Sporus' story endure across centuries is its revelation of fundamental human patterns: power without restraint, obsession without reason, and the reduction of people to objects. These themes resonate because they reflect something persistent in human nature and social organization. The fact that multiple historians preserved his story, despite his low social status, suggests they recognized its broader significance. In documenting Sporus' tragedy, they were creating a historical warning about what happens when power becomes completely separated from moral accountability. Every time we examine his story with empathy and respect, we give him something that was taken away during his life: recognition as a human being with value and dignity. This is perhaps the most powerful form of historical justice, ensuring that victims of oppression aren't forgotten, that their suffering serves as education for future generations. Sporus's tragedy also reveals how gender and identity functioned as instruments of control in the Roman world. The forced castration he underwent represented far more than physical mutilation. It was the deliberate destruction of his fundamental place in Roman society. In Roman culture, masculinity was inseparable from citizenship, honor, and social power. A Roman man's identity was built upon his capacity for military service, political participation, and the continuation of his family line. Castration eliminated all of these possibilities in one brutal stroke. Roman legal codes explicitly recognized this connection between physical integrity and social status. Castrated men, known as eunuchs, existed in a legal gray area, neither fully male nor female in the eyes of Roman law. They could not serve in the legions, hold public office, or legally marry. In essence, castration meant social death. For someone like Sporus, born free and later liberated as a freedman, castration represented a complete reversal of his social trajectory. Instead of potentially achieving higher status through patron relationships or business success, he was thrust into a category Romans considered fundamentally unnatural. What made Nero's treatment of Sporus particularly shocking to Roman sensibilities was the forced feminization that followed the castration. Roman culture had strict boundaries about gender presentation. While they acknowledged the existence of eunuchs from Eastern traditions, forcing a Roman citizen, even a former slave, to dress and act as a woman violated deeply held cultural taboos. The historical sources emphasize how this transformation affected not just Sporus, but everyone who witnessed it. Roman elites, who were forced to address him as Augusta, experienced their own form of psychological distress, as they were compelled to participate in what they understood as a fundamental violation of natural and social order. This cultural context helps explain why Sporus's story was recorded by multiple historians despite his low social status. His transformation represented something beyond individual tragedy. It symbolized how unchecked imperial power could destroy the very foundations of Roman identity and social structure. Although most of Sporus's life after castration was a story of powerlessness and victimization, his final decision to commit suicide contained an important element of resistance. In Roman cultural context, suicide was often seen as an honorable way to avoid greater disgrace. Many Roman historical figures, from Cato the Younger to Mark Antony, chose death rather than accepting defeat or humiliation. Sporus's suicide had a different dimension. He wasn't a defeated general or a failed politician in a power struggle. He was a victim who chose to reclaim agency over his life in the last moment available. In that choice, he refused to become a final spectacle for Roman mass entertainment. He refused to give satisfaction to the sadistic Vitellius. He refused to accept that his life had no value except as an object for others' satisfaction. We must avoid romanticizing suicide as a solution, yet recognize that, in the most extreme circumstances, sometimes the only form of resistance available is refusal to participate further in an oppressive system. Indestructible humanity. Perhaps the most important lesson from Sporus's story is about the resilience of human dignity. Despite everything he endured, physical mutilation, psychological torture, identity erasure, reduction to an object for others' pleasure, he still maintained something essential about his humanity. The final proof of his remaining humanity was his ability to make a moral choice in his last moment. When faced with ultimate degradation, he chose death with dignity rather than life as spectacle. In that choice, he showed that there's something in the human spirit that can't be completely destroyed, even by the most absolute and cruel power. There's a core of human dignity that can be damaged and tortured, yet not entirely eliminated. We must avoid romanticizing suffering or glorifying tragedy. This is recognition that even in the most hopeless circumstances, humans are still capable of acts that affirm their value and dignity. For those who have power, whether political, economic, social, or in other forms, Sporus's story is a stark reminder of the responsibility that comes with that power. Power, especially when concentrated and unchecked, has extraordinary capacity for corruption. Not just corruption in the obvious moral sense, yet subtler corruption of perspective and empathy. Nero began as a young emperor with potential for greatness. Gradually, power without limitations transformed him into a monster capable of unimaginable cruelties. Most horrifyingly, this transformation happened so incrementally that maybe he himself didn't realize how far he had fallen. This is a warning for anyone who has power over others. Without constant vigilance, without reminders of the humanity and dignity of the powerless, without structures that force accountability, even well-intentioned people can become instruments of oppression and cruelty. Finally, the fact that we're still talking about Sporus today, that his story has survived through 2 millennia, despite him dying as non-person in a system that treated him as property, is itself a form of victory over the oppression he faced. The emperors who exploited him are long dead and mostly forgotten, except as historical footnotes. Sporus, a victim whose name wasn't even his real name, has achieved something they couldn't: immortality through compassion and recognition of shared humanity. Every time we tell his story with empathy and respect, every time we acknowledge his suffering as tragedy rather than spectacle, we give him something that was taken away during his life: recognition as a human being with value and dignity. This is the most powerful form of historical justice, ensuring that victims of oppression aren't forgotten, that their suffering isn't in vain, that lessons from their tragedies can help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Because ultimately, Sporus' story is a reminder that behind every statistic about oppression, behind every account of systematic cruelty, there are individual human beings with hopes, fears, dreams, and dignity that deserve to be acknowledged and honored. Perhaps that's the most important legacy we can give him: the promise that as long as there are people who care about human dignity and justice, stories like his will never be truly forgotten. And the lessons they teach will continue to guide us in building a more humane and just world.